Everyone, welcome. This is the Charter Authorizer Support Initiative training. We are doing Charter Authorizing Oversight Best Practices. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a few housekeeping notes. We've just put in the chat the participant folders information. And next slide, please. If you have the opportunity, please rename yourself. Make sure that you have your name and your organization. This makes it much easier for us to be able to know who we're interacting with. So this helps our CDE Zoom host be able to also get the breakout room correct later, and it will help you network so you can see who's on the call. Next slide, please. So let me do some introductions. I am Michelle Johnson. I am the Associate Director for the Charter Schools Department. And with me on the call, I have Mifula Fairley, who's the Executive Director. We also have Tom Hutton, who's the Executive Director from CCAP, Dr. David Patterson, who is the Board President for CCAP. And we're also very grateful that we have Barbara Mendelbaum, who is a coordinating consultant and is here to also be part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So if you've never heard of CASI or the Charter Authorizer Support Initiative, this program is part of the PCSGP or Public Charter School Grant Program, a discretionary grant that was administered by the CDE on behalf of the State Board of Education. Back when this started in 2020, California was awarded approximately 41 million, and now in 2024, they were just awarded 83 million. And so this is now the combined efforts of CDE, CCAP, and SCCOE, and we are CASI. Next slide, please. So our mission is to support charter authorizers up and down the state and ensure that that charter schools are serving students well and meeting the requirements of the law. We have special emphasis on supporting new authorizers, small authorizers, and oversight on non-classroom based charters. So next slide, please. And I'm going to turn the time over to Allison Ball from CDE, who is our compatriot.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And, for this Tuesday after a long weekend, I can do you even better on our new grant. We're actually at $93.8 million on the new grant. Just $10 million. What's 10 million?
What's 10 million?
So thank you again. I'm Allison Ball. I'm the project director for the Public Charter Schools Grant Program Office. We are thrilled about the new award, which still feels relatively new. We were just awarded October 1st of 2024. And we are ramping up activities under this new grant, including some of the new steps for CASI under the new grant. So if you are on the CASI listserv, which you very likely are if you are attending this webinar right now, you may have seen on Friday the CDE's announcement of the release of our newest request for applications, or RFA. And then this one is for CASI. It is a local educational agency contract. So specifically what we are looking to do through this process is to identify up to 3 LEAs, and that specifically is school districts and county offices of education that currently authorize and oversee charter schools for a contract for fiscal year 2025-26 for up to $110,000 per contract. The vision is that these 3 LEAs would work collaboratively to continue the work under CASI and to expand that work under CASI. So there are some components under the program that would expand, some potential for new activities, but of course the vision really is to continue a continuous programming with these new LEAs. To continue the work that has been started by Santa Clara and CCAP. So for more information on this, there is a webinar happening this Thursday, January 23rd from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Please register for that if you're interested in learning more. Registration link is included on this slide, and also the link to the RFA and all of the competition application materials are included on this slide as well. That deadline for applications is coming up quick. It'll be February 18th. 2025. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our program office directly. With that, I'll hand it back to the team.
Thanks, Allison. Next slide, please. So as with every presentation, we do have a caveat. This information contained in
Tell you muted.
Oh,
Can you hear me now?
the audio is not so great. We can hear you, but it's very faint.
All right, let me see. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So as with every presentation, this information contained in this presentation is provided as a reference only. Charter schools and chartering authorities are encouraged to review the laws and regulations and consult with their own legal counsel regarding the application to their specific situations. Next slide, please. So our roadmap for today is basically looking at oversight requirements, best practices, and how to prioritize. This presentation came about specifically because of feedback from all of you. We have been hearing in charter chats and in presentation that current oversight is what we're looking for and needing some additional support and direction and some practical ideas of how to do oversight better, and look at what's going on with fraud and all of the things that are currently in the works. And all of these things are what we have heard from all of you, which is why we are now working on bringing this to you today. So we're going to be looking at differentiated oversight based on school type, annual reports, fiscal oversight, fraud prevention, capacity building, and we're going to have time for your questions and challenges. Next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Dave.
Yes, well, good morning, and all of us welcome to 2025. We will see. I get to start the meat of the conversation. Next slide, please. And I'll start by the general oversight. Oversight responsibilities exist for all types of charter schools. And if it doesn't matter whether they operate independent of the authorizer, are standalone, are created or managed by the authorizer, we use the petition as the basic guideline, as it is a contract by which the school operates. And also the heads up that failure to conduct oversight duties could make an authorizer liable for charter school actions. Next slide, please. This is a graphic we use all the time. Our focus for our workshop today will be in the area in the red circle, monitoring and the oversight process. But there is a life cycle for a charter school, and if you hadn't seen this piece before, it's very helpful for you to understand where you and your charters may be in terms of their activities and place and time. Next slide, please. Now, this is one of our favorite slides because it covers, at least it covers what was the absolute minimum that an authorizer is required to do. It also mirrors what's in the law itself. And as you can see, there are only a very few specific items. Number one, a staff person as the contact person for the charter school, visit each school annually, ensure school complies with all reports required of charters by law, including the LCAP and the LCAP annually update, monitor the physical condition, we'll talk a lot more about that, and provide timely notification of CDE of a renewal, revocation, or a school that ceases operation. Sounds simple, right? Next slide, please. Well, since the beginning of charters, the charter concept is based on a simple premise: greater autonomy in returns for accountability. The first three questions: is the charter school's educational program a success? Is the charter school financially viable? Is the charter school operated and governed effectively? These three questions have been used since the beginnings of charter schools. It frames that basic agreement that it's at the heart of charter schools. Again, greater autonomy and in turn for greater accountability for results. Starting these questions as things to be answered is an effective approach for both authorizers, for schools themselves, and parents. The fourth question addresses a larger question that has emerged in the 30 years since the creation of charter schools. How is the charter school contributing to the public policy purpose? This can be in many ways a school can do it. An example is Fortune School of it, Fortune Schools, a group of schools committed to closing the achievement gap for Black students. Then that's my opportunity to next slide and turn it over back to Michelle.
So when you start looking at authorizing, one of the main questions is, how do we do this? And so there we have a few scenarios. Does any of this sound familiar? We only have a dependent charter, so we just keep things informal. Well, informal can be okay, but authorizers still have to fulfill all the oversight requirements. How about for the first 4 years, all we can manage is to comply with the legal requirements, but in the 5th year, we do renewal. Well, you gotta do check-ins along the way, and you also should have annual reports. Last year's surprises can really get ugly. Next slide, please. We take a tour of the charter school each year. Well, tours are okay, and they're good for relationship building, but a tour really isn't enough. You really do need to have visits and discussions, and they all need to connect back to the petition, to the MOU or the Memorandum of Understanding. You should be looking at academic performance and compliance, and we're going to talk more about all of that later. But don't just take a tour of the school. Or how about, oh, I only had enough time just to drive by the front door. That's not okay either. How about this one? We have the school come and make a presentation to our board once a year about what's going on with them. Well, that's good for relationship building again, but an annual report really does include information from the authorizer staff that is looking at compliance and not just a presentation by the charter school itself on what they think they're doing well. Next slide, please. So we really do need to attend to governance. We need to make sure that the authorizer board is the ultimate decision maker on high stakes decision, that they have ideas and they're focused on sound educational practices. The charter schools governing board is really the responsible group that have governing board agendas, packet materials. We need to make sure that we're getting all of their governing documents. It's a good idea to even go visit governing charter school board meetings. I can tell you we've learned an awful lot by attending board meetings, and have even found out things were like that their boards were questioning, going, oh, we didn't know about this. And so if they didn't know and we didn't know, that makes things a little dicey. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to Tom.
Okay, and actually, this is Tom just channeling my inner Debbie Deal. Those of you who have heard Debbie before know that she's CCAP Senior Fiscal Consultant, and these were kind of her reflections, continuing the theme of sort of, yes, there's the bare minimum that Ed Code requires, but here's some things as a practical matter that in her view really can help frame a more useful and productive authorizing relationship. And one is, she always emphasizes attending to internal control. So from a fiscal perspective, this goes beyond sort of just here's the latest financials on how the school is doing financially, but what are the systems the school has in place to manage both its fiscal health and also fiscal integrity. So attention to policies and procedures. And by the way, these things, as you'll see I'll skip ahead to the last bullet, they go beyond just the fiscal, but this is Debbie's framing of it. But policies and procedures, desk manuals that the school uses can give you a lot of insight into how the school operates. She emphasizes, build that relationship. But there's a team approach to supporting and overseeing the charter school, and the ongoing active communication can really build that relationship and minimize the surprises and on both sides, help with understanding and make things go more smoothly. Debbie will always emphasize this point: if it's not in writing, it did not happen. So while we like these encouraging and sort of more collaborative relationships with a charter school, it is still very important to attend to documenting things in writing so that there's a record if something goes south a little bit. Evaluations of progress throughout the year. The annual report is great. We'll talk about that to some degree later in this presentation, but sort of check-ins along the way, just as Michelle was saying, don't wait till year 5 or year 7 in some cases now. But those check-ins along the way will really help. And you know, site visits, one is required. There are a lot of authorizers who might do more than one. Maybe one is more in the nature of sort of checking some things that you have to check physically, and the other is more like focus groups and talking to people. There's, you know, and look, one may be what you can manage in your world. We get that, but it is worth considering whether there might be an opportunity to sort of mix it up and have some more check-ins along the way. And that's enough for that one. We'll continue moving on, and I can't remember who's next.
That would be me. Good morning, everyone. Just give everybody a second to process all of that. There's so much that we're responsible for in this work. And one of the things that often comes to mind as you start to hear this is, but I'm just one person in my office, or we have a very small team. You might be the only one that is the actual contact for charter oversight. You might have multiple duties. The rest of your team might have multiple duties. So the question really becomes, how do we get started? And one of the things that we recommend is really just start by digging into legal requirements. Those were identified earlier in the slide. Really be aware of mandated timelines. There are certain things that we need to do, that we need to collect, that happen on a schedule. A lot of those fiscal documents, the LCAP. Be aware of compliance issues if the school isn't submitting those types of documents, isn't completing an LCAP, has missing parts. There's something going on with board meetings, governance in general. Then really work to develop your local processes. And that might be something that takes place over a period of time, even 2, 3, 5 years. But start somewhere, start documenting what it is that you're doing so that you can replicate that process and build internal capacity in your organization. If you were to leave or other people were to leave, it's really important to have those local processes documented. The other thing that you can do is really focus on being a presence at the charter schools board meetings. And Michelle just said a little bit ago that you learn a lot, and you absolutely do. There are things that you can capture in terms of anecdotal data, just in the way that they operate. You can get those fiscal updates, you can get those leadership updates, you can see how they interact with each other, how they interact in making decisions, how and if they interact with the public. And then as part of that, you really want to make sure, again, that you have that annual documentation and that you're sharing that progress report with your charter school leaders. Next slide. Then when you've put some of those pieces in place, you can start thinking about additional sound practices and add additional layers to your oversight work. And that might include things like those, you know, creating intervention protocols. So what happens when a school is identified in the low renewal tier and they still have 3 years left on their charter? How do you actually start building in those processes to intervene and or establish protocols for how you will interact with that school moving forward leading up to renewal? You can work on your practices around your annual reports and how you will interact with your authorizing board. In terms of either every year or working up to renewal, and then consider more than one annual site visit. So we know that one is mandatory, it's written into Ed Code, but that doesn't necessarily make it best practice. Try to be on site, whether it be formal visits, informal visits, observing board meetings, lots of different ways that you can interact with your charter school and just be a presence. And then start working to network with other authorizers, and that would be forums like this. If you're a county office, there's a county office authorizer forum. Then work to build your oversight capacity in the rest of your organization. And so for some of us, we're really working kind of in isolation, but we have a larger team that we can tap into, our fiscal team, our human resources team. You might even work with your DA support folks if a charter school's in DA. Lots of different ways that you can organize yourself within an organization, even if you're only an individual person. And those are things that take time because then you're changing sometimes culture within your organization. But those are all processes that can happen long term. And I believe it goes back to Michelle.
Thank you. Next slide. So we've given you a lot of information, but where are the actual tools? So first off, we do have a resource folder that has a resource page of all the different links that you can have access to. Please utilize that participant folder. It also has the slide deck that we're going through. And all of this will also be posted on the CDE CASI website. But there are, on SCCOE's website, we have information for county charters, oversight tools. We have a data book that has lots of different information regarding Santa Clara charters, but there are also forms and protocols and anything else that an authorizer might need that they can utilize. And you're more than welcome to contact SCCOE to get any further details on how to utilize those documents. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom to talk about CCAP tools.
Yeah, and just like Santa Clara County, we have a resource library online at CCAP. And in it, you will find a wide variety of things, a couple of which we're going to touch on a little bit more today, and that is our annual report toolkit, which some of you already are familiar with, but as you may have seen, we were getting toward the holidays, so in case you missed it, there's a new version out, which Barbara's going to walk us through a little bit. You've heard us mention in past CASI events about the anti-fraud recommendations in the report that CCAP came up with the help of a broad group from across the state, and we'll touch on that a little bit more today as well. There's also a new school petition toolkit. That one, by the way, is up for updating this year, and we would certainly welcome any input that people have who have used that or checked it out about, these things are meant to be fine-tuned and continually improved. So we certainly welcome that feedback loop. And you'll find other useful grab-and-go tools in the library. But we also have resources there from other authorizers, from NACSA, the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, from other states. And so there's a collection of English learner resources. So there's a wide variety of things you can check out there, and it's searchable. On to the next slide.
The next slide is basically differentiating oversight based on the type of charter school. And here, we're going to be talking about dependent charter schools. To start, next slide, please. Okay. And this one, so dependent is not a word that's in the education code. We mostly think about it as a locally funded versus a direct funded charter school. The other way to think about it is who actually is the governing board of the charter school. If the governing board is the same as the authorizer, it's often then described as a dependent school. Now, Education Code Section 47601 states that all charters will operate independently from an existing school district structure. But we also have a good number of dependent charter schools, or ones that, in fact, have that authorizer also serving as the governing board of the charter. So we have to work through issues of autonomy, arm's length, making sure that so when the work that the board is doing as a charter school governing board, or is it as an authorizer? For the purposes of our discussion here, it's nicely put as what hat are we wearing? What type of agenda information is out there? Also, there's many occasions where you have a dependent charter school where they have a school advisory council. Maybe it's a school site council, maybe it's something, a different body, but that's a typical way that this is in fact utilized. Next slide, please. So, charter school staff are usually district or county office staff. Now, a note that we want to put out there is that school leaders from a district may not actually have much background or experience with charter schools. So there's sometimes a learning curve there. But for legal purposes, there is in fact one entity and a dependent charter school. We often talk about MOUs. A dependent charter school may have an MOU, but it may look very different, or it may not be an MOU at all. It may be a set of district procedures that differentiate how the activities are done with the charter versus some of the district's traditional schools. Next slide, please. Now, on the financial side, in terms of operations, first under fiscal, we're going to first give you more details later. But the biggest issue that you need to be aware of is the issue of commingling of funds, which makes it difficult or even impossible to separate out the charter school finances. It's important that is known and can be done. Now, the other piece that some people sometimes don't remember or recognize that is a separate LEA. A charter school must have its own LCAP. The charter school is not part of the district's LCAP. Maybe they're tied in some ways, but they have their requirement for their own LCAP. They have to follow the same LCAP process. And the authorizer just reviews the LCAP. It does not approve it. Is the general rule for LCAPs and charter schools. Next slide, please. And this I turn back to Barbara.
Thank you. The next slide would be great. Thank you. So a non-classroom based charter school is a charter school in which more than 20% of instruction is offered outside of the traditional classroom. And to date, there is still no EDCO definition for a hybrid program, but that would include things like our hybrid programs where students are on campus for that additional instructional support, but their primary work occurs at home. Asynchronous learning, remote distance learning, completely virtual programs. We have quite a few of those where students aren't on campus at all. They might come together in the community. Those types of programs fall under a very specific section of Ed Code. It's listed there, it's linked there. Michelle and I had, I think, a lengthy conversation a couple of years ago around around independent study, and how to best share the information. And there's just so much in the education code around independent study that providing you with the direct link is really the best way for you to become familiar with it. It's undergone significant reform. So if you have not been involved with independent study in recent years, it's really important that you brush up. There were even some big updates last year. And a lot of this really is impacted by audits and can be quite costly to schools if it's not done well. And so when you have new school leaders come in and into an independent study program that you're overseeing, and they're not familiar with independent study, really having access to this Ed Code is very important. So I'd keep that handy. Next slide, please. There is a non-classroom based moratorium through the beginning of 2026, and there were few exceptions to that. Most of those have been dealt with, but essentially if somebody, and nobody should, but if somebody were to bring you a petition for a new school that's non-classroom based, those are not allowed until such time as that either expires or the law is updated. Next slide. And then finally, for non-classroom based oversight, just a couple of pieces that you should pay attention to. The online platforms are giving us the ability to really oversee these programs in ways that we couldn't before the pandemic. And most of that is because our ability as authorizers to access virtual tools like Zoom and what have you were very limited in some of our organizations. Now they are fairly widespread. And so we can make those classrooms more accessible to ourselves as authorizers without necessarily needing to be on site. You can request access to meetings in classrooms. You can conduct your regular online program reviews and desk audits. That would be either through some procedure that you've set up as your own, maybe through Google or through Epicenter or DTS, in some way collecting documents through a repository or having them submit documents to you, just like you would any other charter school that you're overseeing. And then you can work on remote observation engagement. You can observe board meetings that way without having to be on site, especially if those board meetings are later in the evening. A lot of times those meetings that do happen to have remote access. I found that even though there's a link as required by law, if there are multiple schools in different areas, sometimes you can't get into those. You're put in a waiting room and nobody comes back and lets you in. So it's really important, I think, to kind of test those different ways that folks might access the decision-making process for those non-classroom based programs. And then we really want to review fiscal, operational, and ed programs, the same as we would seat-based programs. Sometimes you'll hear non-classroom based charter school leaders say, we're independent study, we don't have classrooms. And you should still really work to observe those programs just like you would any other seat-based program. And maybe even more so because we want to make sure that we have real students, real parents, real teachers that are running those programs. You might review non-classroom based funding determinations. That's the paperwork where the school has to document how they are spending instructional money, and that is how they are funded. That is not a process that can start when your non-classroom based funding determination is due. It really needs to start the day that you're first approved for your non-classroom based funding, and then it becomes a document tracking process along the way for the school. You might also pay attention to things like instructional minute requirements. A lot of times you'll hear schools say, we're independent study, we don't have to meet instructional requirements. And they don't for grade spans, but they do for annual minute requirements. And so that is something to pay attention to. And auditors, I've heard some independent study charter school leaders say that auditors are actually asking them how they know they're meeting instructional minute requirements. And so having that kind of laid out ahead of time and being proactive with that is important. And then there's always the idea that you should be careful with legalese and work with legal counsel where you need to. A good example of that would be a master agreement for independent study. The language that is in those documents is tied directly to funding, and there can be fiscal consequences if language is missing. And you probably don't want to put yourself in the position as the oversight contact of actually trying to determine whether some documents meet all legal requirements, because you don't want the finger pointed at you if they don't. So leave some things to legal counsel. You might review credential requirements, or not might, you should review credential requirements against the charter school. 44865 is a specific piece of ed code that allows for some flexibility in non-classroom based environments where teachers teach multiple subjects despite their credential. And then reviewing policies and procedures that are implemented when IS isn't an appropriate placement. So there's this piece of ed code that says charter schools can't counsel students out. They can't deter families from enrolling. In independent study ed code, the language says that independent study might not be an appropriate placement for every student. And so a lot of times you'll see that schools have policies around what happens when independent study is not an appropriate placement. How do we make sure that the student is in the appropriate placement, and what does that procedure look like? Generally, I think beyond 3 phone calls or 3 letters home and we've dropped you. So I think that is all I have there. Next slide. 30, that goes back to Michelle.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to be moving into the dashboard alternative school status. This is the other special category of schools that require oversight. Next slide, please. So dashboard alternative school status, or DAS schools, can come in 2 forms. So the first one is that by their very nature, they are designated as DAS. And the other is that you apply to become a DAS school because you're serving a specific population that needs something different. And so next slide, please. Because we have these dashboard alternatives, meaning they do not fit the specifics that would qualify them to have colors and status on the California School Dashboard. Well, since they can't get a high, middle, or low from looking at the dashboard, we have to come up with some alternative metrics. And so 47607C7 basically says that the chartering authority shall meet with the charter school during that first year of the charter school's term to mutually agree to discuss alternative metrics to be considered pursuant to this paragraph, and those alternative metrics will start. So essentially, how are we going to look at this very different school and determine that they should be renewed? And so that's what these alternative metrics are to be created between the authorizer and the charter school. Next slide, please. So remember that although DOS schools have to complete an LCAP and the SARC, they are still reviewed using alternative metrics. So they still have all of those same things that everybody else has to do, but we are focused on the alternative metrics. We do site visits. We provide annual reports. We monitor finances just like we do with everybody else. We review the school data. We look at their enrollment, their attendance. We look at the CalPADs. We look at their principal apportionment. We look at the school's California School Dashboard. It's going to look a little different because DOS schools don't really end up on the dashboard. And then we have the LCAP, we have the SARC, and we have the comprehensive safety plan. So all of those same things, a little tweak, but we're utilizing alternative metrics. Next slide, please. So we want to make sure that we focus on that good relationship. Communication is absolutely a key. We have to be collaborative. We have to be present. As we've been saying all over before, attend charter school board meetings, events, participate in local community events. Make sure that you know DOS language as well as the DOS school itself. Because if you're not utilizing the same language, you're going to have differences of opinion, and that will simply mess up the relationship and will also mess up those alternative metrics. Make sure that you discuss DOS status not only with the charter board, but with the authorizer board. Because since DOS schools are different, we have to educate our own boards so that they understand, oh, all those things that you thought about for high, middle, and low, that doesn't apply with DOS. And they may want to try and apply some of those things that they already know with a school that it doesn't fit. So also understand that alternative metrics are only one component of the school's complete accountability profile. Just because they may be doing fine on those alternative metrics, they could still have fiscal issues. They could still have governance issues. And so you have to look at the totality of the circumstances. Treat questions to DOS schools as additional opportunities to increase common understanding. I can tell you that we currently have a DOS school that is also our dependent charter and is a hybrid. So all three of these various things that we've been working on, so we have to really have a good conversation about our one school that fits these three different pieces. Our annual visits look very different with this one school than all the rest of our schools. And so we have to utilize that conversation piece to build that relationship, because since they're a dependent charter, their employees are our employees. So we have, even though we're all members of SCCOE, they're really different because they operate under that charter school. And so it's a really interesting relationship, and that's the whole point. You need to look at what is the nature of this charter school and how can you build that relationship so that you have that authorizer oversight as well as support piece working together. So there you go. Next slide. And before we jump into annual reports, we've given you an awful lot of information. Does anyone have any questions? You can throw it into the chat. because we're going to be moving into annual reports at this moment. And so clarifying questions. Anybody lost? Well, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Okay, well, let's dive right into annual reports. And again, annual reports is not to be found in Ed Code, but they really are. NACSA has, for those of you who are familiar with the National Association, they have sort of essential practices that they say are these are the things that really good authorizers should be looking at doing. And one of their essential practices is an annual report. And why do you want to do it? Well, it's an important check-in, going back to Dave's point, avoiding surprises at renewal time. But it also kind of it's sort of a self-imposed discipline to really take a look at things periodically. And it's a very valuable tool, by the way, to make sure that your charter school's governing board spend some time digesting to keep one of the challenges for governing boards is focusing on the most important things for the school, and this is a really great way to help nudge that along. So you're looking ahead to renewal when you issue these things. Yes, this is how the school is doing right now, but the overarching sort of context for doing an annual report is looking ahead to that renewal discussion. So you're highlighting strengths that may offer some insights and opportunities for not only for the charter school to self-improve, but part of the premise of chartering is we can try different things and model different things that the rest of us can learn from. So this can be a help for that as well. But you also are, yes, identifying areas, opportunities for improvement that will help the school and the school's governing board figure out some things. The bottom line is avoiding any of those surprises and ensuring transparency, as Dave alluded to earlier. So the next slide. As many of you know, and many of you actually had a hand in creating, CCAP has an annual report toolkit. We had WestEd helping us with that, and we convened lots of groups of those of you who are on this call. We especially drew a lot of the expertise from our larger shops, but then we did a lot of translation to how do we make this workable for those of you who are solo flyer or a part-time authorizer on top of your other duties, so people don't have to reinvent the wheel from ground zero. The exciting thing from our standpoint is Barbara Mandelbaum is our coordinating consultant for CCAP, and Barbara helps us. There are some authorizers that CCAP kind of helps directly by providing services beyond sort of like trainings and toolkits, and that really had a great benefit to us in that it made us use our own tools, and that gave us some insights and this could be easier, this could be better. And Barbara really has done the lion's share of that work and has come up with a new version based on not only legal changes and development since the last one, but really on feedback from the field and her own use of it. And she'll walk us through that, but you can find it under the resources, authorizer toolkits. I think we've got a link we could put in there. It's also in the resources page that we provided in the participant folder. So Barbara, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Next slide. Thank you. So yeah, I think that's really important is, we didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we did make significant updates to the document based on our own use of it and feedback from those that have used it and or other modified tools out there in the field. The toolkit and the frameworks, they're really a foundational framework. They're a resource for authorizers to use, but they're meant to be customized to fit local context. So this is kind of the tricky part when you're working to develop tools is how do you make it accessible to multiple different types of authorizers, right? It could be the one-person shop, it could be the three-person review team, and then the larger shops like Santa Clara generally have their own tools. So really what we're thinking about is how do we make it accessible to those that have large portfolios, small portfolios, mid to small oversight teams. Those toolkit components, they are really grounded in legal requirements and then add some best practices. And then the toolkit components include a focus on the original intent of the Charter Schools Act. So those are some key points about them. Next slide. The components of the framework align with those 4 core questions that Dave reflected on earlier. So Is the school a success in its education program? Is it financially viable? Do they have effective operations and governance? And are they serving public policy purpose? So that's kind of at the heart of all of the documents. And then we have an annual performance progress report. We've provided some site visit protocols, which is a separate tool. It wasn't separate before. And then we've also added some grab and go ready to use tools. So in the past, we had the framework, and embedded within the framework was the template, which was hard to pick out. So when we set these up, we did our framework with our examples of how to complete it, but then we also made a grab and go folder with those tools just ready for you to pull and use. And I'd say the formatting is probably 99% clean as I use them this year. I find little things, but we've given you the option to, select from drop-down lists, given you color coding instructions so that you can consistently color code different fields. So lots of different things have been added that way. Next slide. The oversight framework is a new piece. So we had core frameworks in the past. The oversight framework includes what we've decided are criteria for inclusion of reporting requirements, and then the purpose for reviewing. So a lot of times we ask for documents to be submitted, and then they sit there and there's really, yep, they turned it in. And then we really don't have a purpose for reviewing it. If there is no purpose for reviewing it or for asking for it, maybe it is something that we shouldn't ask for. So this document is not the end all be all. There's still work to do, but we have several criteria for how we've decided to include documents. And every time we talk about adding a new requirement, if it's not in an MOU specifically, it's just like, oh, maybe we missed this. We sit down and we compare it to the criteria for inclusion and try and figure out where it fits. And then we ask ourselves, what's our purpose for asking for it? That document, again, it's not meant to be all inclusive. It has a sample table in there for you, showing you how we've organized that work and the criteria that we've aligned it with, and the purposes that we've aligned it with. It doesn't mean that, you're not going to have something that fits your local context that you wouldn't want to add to that. It's meant to be a starting point for you, especially if you're new. It describes the process for how you might establish your own oversight procedure. So it's just a good tool for you to pull and get to work with, and at least gives you something to get yourself going. And then there's also a sort of full spreadsheet format that a couple of different LEAs asked for that's included on the website. So it takes that table that we've put together for you, and it gives you the opportunity to sort things by different topics or different criteria or different purpose numbers if you choose to do that. Next slide. Then the existing the pre-existing annual report toolkit had several documents. It had the annual performance progress report. It had an academic framework, a financial health and sustainability framework, operations and governance framework, and the public policy purpose framework. Well, actually, the public policy purpose framework did not exist before. That's a new one. So we had the three key ones. Public policy purpose was still in process of being defined, and the caveat is it's still in process of being defined. But we decided to put something together that aligned with the original intent of charter schools, just to make it more complete to start and have a way to really flesh out the annual report with some content. And we may continue to do some work on that piece and revise it. So stay tuned there. But the annual performance report is a summary progress report. This is how we've organized it, a summary progress report. And then those framework templates, we're organizing them as a staff report appendices to the performance report. And the reason that we're doing that is the one thing that I found is a lot of times when we have these lengthy documents, which we really need for the paper trail leading up to renewal, but sometimes we provide our board members with those or the public with those. And I've seen that board members miss really, really important information because it's buried within the staff report. And so the performance report has really been created to be a summary. It has an executive summary, and it's largely just a color-coded table so they can go down the list and say, yep, meets requirements in all these areas except for this one. And if they want more information, they can then go to the appendice staff report to get more information. Next slide. So we continue to develop and refine tools to align with legal requirements, identify best practices and experiences from the field. Even though we have version 2 online, again, the work isn't finished, right? We didn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We made some substantial changes and improvements. Legal updates, they just added English, long-term English language learners. That language has been added to the reports. But as those things continue to develop and/or we get feedback from the field on ways to streamline or identified need, we will continue to work to revise those tools. Next slide. So some very specific updates. We created that summary performance report that I spoke about and then made the detailed appendix staff report. We created multiple performance report options to accommodate large and small authorizers. Large and small authorizers, again, in terms of the size of the oversight team, but also in terms of the size of the portfolio. So you might have a small authorizing shop that's 1 or 2 people with 15 different charters. And your needs for that annual report are very different than somebody who is 1 person with 1 or 2 schools. And so 3 different options for the performance report. This is also what I'm finding this year. It's allowing for those extensions that we've had to charter renewals, those mandated extensions. Now we have like instead of year 1 through 4, how the basic one is set up, now we have some schools that are in year 6 and 7. And so rather than going back and, modifying a report, you could just pull a different report that allows you to look at the term just a little bit different until they start their next cycle. We moved some key information on school performance to the top of the report. We created that executive summary. So what's going well in the school? What are some areas of identified need? And then what are some authorizer required actions? So they might have some areas they need to improve that don't really require that they do anything specific for you. And then they may have some safety issues or they're in the low performance level for renewal and they definitely need to do something. And so it gives you a space to identify that. We realigned public policy purpose with the original intent of the Charter Schools Act, at least for now. We separated the report color schemes from the California dashboard color schemes. So that was one thing that I noticed in the original one is that we plug in our dashboard data in what is now that staff report appendix document. And those should be California dashboard colors. In the performance report, it was using the same colors. And then what I found in conversations with folks is that they were getting the intent of the colors confused. So if a school's, meeting requirements in terms of a concept, the blue there doesn't necessarily mean the same as the blue on the dashboard, which is measuring change over time. We allowed for multiple year or multi-year school performance tracking in that report and then in the performance progress report. And then we created those ready to use fully formatted templates. Next slide. The framework updates. So the frameworks are really meant to be, the way they were originally designed is kind of your instruction manual, like what you should be thinking about in terms of a topic. And then it provided some detailed examples for how you might complete the reports or how you might think about things. So some of the updates there, the fiscal framework was actually updated by Debbie Deal in spring of 2023. So we haven't done anything with that in our most recent update. We just pulled that forward. We developed the oversight framework, as I spoke about previously, to help authorizers identify criteria for inclusion and oversight practice. And then we developed that public policy framework, as I spoke to earlier. It hadn't been developed, so we pulled something together. Again, that one is not necessarily the end all be all, but it's nice to have something there, and we will continue to work on that as we can. Then with the remaining frameworks, academic framework, the governance operations frameworks, we took those and we streamlined the language. They're really just cleaned it up, right? Made it more succinct. Again, it's kind of that balance between giving folks enough to go on to be able to implement and then saying so much that you just don't even have time to look at the document. So we tried to clean that up a little bit. updated the instructions for the report template completion, and then we updated the PowerPoints to align. Next slide. So the oversight frameworks, the additions to that we previously described. Site visit protocols, we added, there's a link in there for that. So just pulling forward some of the site visit pieces that we're currently using, including an on-site document review. We're currently doing on-site document reviews in the fall and looking at those documents that contain personally identifiable information. We're not asking for any personally identifiable information through the online repository, when you have to keep track of all of those privacy agreements between yourself and a third party and the charter school, it just gets a little bit messy. So for things like special education document review or personnel document review, we go on site in the fall and we're looking at those. So we've included those types of documents and then the ED program site visit protocol as well. The reorganization of public policy purpose. Originally, it was a school reflection, and so we've added some data points for the actual staff report in order to speak in the performance progress report about a school's progress and what's working, what's not. If you have ideas about what else might be included there, we'd love to hear from you. And then the grab and go tools, we have a document in there for the LCAP review. Most of you probably know, some of you might not know that charter school LCAPs have slightly different requirements. So there are a lot of tools out there, including ones made by, the superintendent's organizations and what have you. And those are good so long as you have enough experience with the LCAP that you know which items are different for charter schools. Those documents can be long and unwieldy for those of us in this role. So I went down through the instructions in the LCAP and I literally made a simplified checklist by category so that you can go down and plug in those pieces, and we'll do our best to keep that updated. We have a website review document. Not every legal requirement is on there. There are so many things that need to be included on the website, but we called out a couple that are different for Title I. And then for different categories, safety or ed program or policy, whatever those, different ideas might be. So it's a very short document, not intended to be the end all be all or comprehensive, but to spot check, right? It's the school and the governing board's responsibility to run their school. So we're formulating tools that allow us to do the work of a small shop generally. How do we go in and spot check? If you see that there's nothing on their website that needs to be there, then you might dig a little bit deeper in terms of what else they should be adding. At that point, I generally refer schools to places like CSDC where they have comprehensive lists of what should be on the website, but that's our little spot check document. Governance observation tools, site visit tools, and then the annual report template are all there under Grab and Go tools. Next page. I think this is this still me? Oh, yes, this is our suggested criteria for requiring a document. So we didn't pull the purposes in here, but some of the things that we talked about would make good reasons for asking for something to be submitted by a charter school include, is it required by law that they submit it? Those would be our fiscal documents and LCAP. Is it necessary to monitor the school's fiscal condition? Specifically, and ed code's listed there for you. Is it needed for you to fulfill your authorizer oversight responsibilities? That one is a pretty big one in terms of things like revocation leading up to that, right? Because we know we have to give notice to schools and give them the opportunity to correct their issues. Sorry, the chat's popping up over the language on the screen. Necessary to ensure authorizer complies with required oversight responsibilities. So the authorizer isn't responsible for charter school issues. A big one there for me, you can see the things that are listed, debts, obligations, etc. A big one there for me is safety. And so I always give the example of the Paradise Camp Fire. Had a charter school who had a release bar on the door that wasn't working right, and the fire marshal hadn't signed off on their fire certificate, and that wasn't getting done. She'd a notice to cure because safety is super important, especially when it comes to fire. And then that went out, but really felt that that was important. And within a month or two afterwards, the school was lost in the Paradise Camp Fire. So I always share that you never know what to expect. And safety is a really big one. So I would prioritize that. And then necessary for authorizers to make high quality data-driven renewal and non-renewal decisions would be the last one. So we test every item against those different criteria to decide whether it fits. And then the piece that wasn't explicitly called out here is we also ask ourselves, is somebody else responsible for it? So you have things like the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan. OSHA has technically been assigned the duty of monitoring that. It doesn't mean that you can't check for it when you're on site, or, you know, through the course of conversation, but really that responsibility falls to somebody else. So you'll notice that we've left items like that off the list. It doesn't mean that you can't add them in if you feel that it fits and it's important to your organization. And then I believe it goes to Tom.
All right, we'll go to the next slide. But before we jump into fiscal, you know, again, an opportunity to ask any questions. I mean, encompassed in what we framed as annual report is like kind of the world of monitoring, of oversight. So because everything kind of boils into that. So this is a good opportunity for questions or suggestions or reflections. And I guess, Marlo, you raise your hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a question about when we're talking about looking at, you know, documents either on site or when we're asking them to turn them in. For the DOJ and fingerprinting background check for employees of the school. I mean, we check the vendors as well, but with the employees of the school, I get feedback sometimes from the charters that they can't provide like a report of that what they do. And so I usually will get a statement saying that they have actually every year I get a statement that I make them, you know, like an affidavit kind of thing saying, you know, we've complied with this. But does anyone out there have a way of having the school run a report? They say they don't have a way of running a report.
Marlo, that's where we implemented the process of doing the on-site document review, which may or may not be practical for you depending on distance that you would have to travel, but we're doing that with the schools, and that's our opportunity to go in and validate those things that they've said or certified are true. And so our personnel consultant will go into the school and spot check those specific areas. And so you can look at that tool in the site visit tools in online, but that would be one way to do it.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Are there questions or reflections on annual reporting or anything that Barbara's covered so far? Well, before we move on, I'll just reiterate, you know, these tools are improved because of the feedback that we receive from all of you who are in the field using them. And even if you're not using it, if there's a reason why not, you know, we'd like to know, because these are intended to be useful to as many people as possible. So as we work on that one and we start diving into updating the new school petition toolkit, we certainly welcome people's insights and suggestions. We're going to dive into fiscal, and this is going to be the brief version of this. We have done and could do whole sessions just on this topic, but this is going to be sort of the brief overview and point you to some things. And just in general, again, going beyond sort of the minimal ed code requirements and talking about what kind of maybe works more effectively for fiscal oversight. We kind of encourage that you build that partnership, that again, reiterating what the earlier slide that I shared from Debbie, establishing those communications, the expectations for renewal being clear up front, providing, and this is tricky. You know, we went through this with COVID, where there was tons of information about funding sources available to charter schools. And we really encourage people to help get that information to the charter schools. And there was a little bit of trepidation, like if we miss something, they're going to blame us. And it's, you know, that's not the job of an authorizer. But in general, there's so many things that change. And as we all know, most charter school closures are for fiscal reasons. So to the extent that as an authorizer role, you can help keep charters, especially the small mom and pop charters, apprised of major developments that may impact their fiscal outlook, like a COLA just changed, it's a lot less than what, those sorts of things. That's a useful thing to consider doing if it's within your bandwidth to do so. And just in general, whether you are a fiscal professional or not, understanding the basics of oversight and industry best practices when it comes to fiscal. So next slide. here are some of the kind of the key touch points just in terms of a school's overall fiscal health and outlook. Obviously, enrollment is and ADA are really key to basically what their fiscal situation is going to be, but also understanding what's happening with unduplicated pupil count, because that can really have a very significant impact on their funding. And what Debbie always says, cash is king. So what the cash on hand is and what their cash management intents are, cash flow, give us a cash flow projection. How are things looking for you going forward? Board approval deadlines. This is more on the compliance side of fiscal, and the next slide we'll talk about that, but making sure that the school is on top of the procedural deadlines for fiscal for the timely reporting. Next slide. So this is just the quick summary slide of the major touch point. They adopt their budget and their LCAP, which has a budget component on or before July 1st. And you've got the interim reports, first and second, that come in at different places along the way. They need to submit their independent financial audit toward the end of the year, and along the way, you want to have gotten the unaudited actuals so you can kind of see how the year went. Next. I hope my sound was okay. I just got a little warning that my internet is unstable, so give me a high sign if I'm breaking up. But when Barbara talked about okay, I'm going to turn off my camera, and maybe that will free up a little bit more space. If it doesn't work, let me know. But Barbara talked about the components of the annual report toolkit, and one of those is the financial health and sustainability framework. And again, while it is part of an annual report toolkit, it is intended to be a framework that will allow for the ongoing oversight of the fiscal health of the school. And it has performance indicators on a variety of things. And the effort that really went into this with Debbie and all the folks, including those here who collaborated on this, is how do we really focus on the really key indicators that even a small authorizer can and should be paying attention to, that will give you some confidence in the health of the school. There are fantastic tools that FCMAT has developed that are very robust and all-encompassing, and this was an attempt to sort of boil things down to the essentials. And so that, again, it's part of the annual report toolkit. There's a direct link there. If you'll go to the next slide. It's divided into sort of three groups. One is the short-term fiscal outlook for the school, but then you're wanting to look at the longer-term sustainability factors. So that they're grouped in those ways. You can sort of see in the near term it's okay, but boy, in the long term, this cash flow projection is looking like things are going to get a little rough. But maybe they've got a major facility funding, and you want to make sure that that's fine. And to have them map that out. And then there's also the fiscal controls. And this is, again, we'll talk after this about a little bit about the fraud prevention, but that's more in the nature of fiscal integrity as opposed to just fiscal health. For each of these indicators, the toolkit it explains it in English. It has the formula and what you plug into where in English. It shows you an example of how it's applied and whether or not in that hypothetical example the school would or not be meeting the standard. And how you use this. Again, one of the challenge, sometimes when you're dealing with schools, they kind of feel like if you flag anything, it's sort of the black eye, and that's not the intent at all. It's really it is where maybe some more attention or explanation is warranted. Hey, I have a question about this. It looks like you have some quite a bit of long-term debt here. What's going on there? And that gives the school an opportunity to explain why. Maybe the school is in the red in 1 year because this is their multi-year plan on how they're going to accomplish a major thing, and you just need to sort of understand how it's going to work, and then it's fine. So, but these just give you the things to sort of the talking points to have the conversation. Next slide. We did want to touch on a little bit non-classroom based and independent study. I think Michelle or Barbara or Dave, whoever was talking about this, I forget now, about the non-classroom based funding determination process. That is, it's important to understand how that works. It's not it's a function that the department makes rather than the authorizer, but just being aware of it because it does have some major implications for the financial outlook of the school. If they're not able to make a showing that gets them the full funding because of how their expenses are going toward instruction or not, that will have a major impact on how much funding they're getting from that proposition. The authorizer may have a role if CDE is having a little bit of trouble getting response from the school, then they may ask for your help with that. In general, for these schools, the fiscal oversight is the same as for classroom-based charter schools, but just be aware of the non-classroom-based funding determination process. I should just mention as an aside that is very much under discussion in Sacramento right now. There was a report, which I'll talk about in a little while, that came out that said maybe we want to re-examine some of that. The legislature requested this report of the Legislative Analyst's Office and FCMAT, and they came up with some recommendations. So that is something to watch. It may be changing, and if so, I'm sure we'll be sharing that information here. Next slide. Dependent charter schools, again, picking up on the discussion earlier. The district is also an authorizer in addition to sort of being the governing body for the school, and you still have some fiscal performance duties. And as Dave mentioned, you do want to sort of observe those proprieties of the authorizer-school relationship. It will look different, obviously, with a dependent school, but when we have helped some districts look at this, one insight is just, make sure that people are still paying attention to the petition and the MOU and to Ed Code. There's a way in which these things are sort of laid out at the beginning, and then they sort of collect dust on a shelf, and it kind of migrates into being treated like a school of the district for all purposes. And let me just say, there are reasons why you may want to treat a dependent school as a school of the district for some purposes, but you do want to make sure that that's in alignment with how it was mapped out, or if those things need to be updated to reflect that. And there are some certain things that you still have to do as an authorizer regardless. And Dave touched on some of them, but moving on to the next slide. Again, the school has its own LCAP. It does have to have some independence of fiscal operations. You do want to book things separately. Fund 9 is how most people do it, but that way so that you can isolate out the financial outlook and performance of the school compared to the district as a whole. That's not unlike if you're an authorizer who deals with a CMO with multiple schools and they send you financials that have their whole group of schools, and that doesn't really give you the lens you need on the particular school. That's your responsibility. Next slide. And Dave mentioned this, it's the commingling of the funds that makes it difficult. Now, there may be reasons, again, that you fund things differently. Your district will fund things differently in a dependent school than it would at an independent school. Maybe they handle some functions just as if it were a school of the district. But if you can kind of isolate that out in Fund 9 so that it's easily trackable, that's the better practice for doing that. And then one thing about LCFF, in you're making your calculation, be careful about looking at the school zone calculation as opposed to grouping it in with the districts, because say, for example, the unduplicated count is significantly different for the dependent school. That could have a major impact on their funding. So you do want to be paying attention to that separately. Next. Again, I mentioned you may handle some things differently when it's a dependent school. It could be that while you have an independent school that purchases some services from the district, that's not the authorizer relationship. That's sort of almost like a vendor relationship. But they may do that differently. It's just as a matter of efficiency, it makes more sense to handle some things in the district, and that's okay. But you want to, again, be able to isolate out those numbers and see what's happening there. The charter school will be in your district audit, but the auditor too is supposed to be able to have a lens that looks particularly at that school. And again, the LCFF calculation may be different, and that may have implications for the school's own LCAP. Next. This is, again, we said we'd mention just a little bit of less the fiscal performance, but the fiscal integrity. And certainly we've all had discussions here and at the CCAP conference multiple times and everything about, the aftermath of A3. And there's a lot of discussion in Sacramento right now. If we can move to the next slide. Um, that some of you have heard this discussion before. Obviously, everyone was a loser with the A3 fraud and with cases like it. And what came out of it, which was very eye-opening to everyone, is just kind of the top to bottom vulnerabilities that the system had that were exploited in that system. So next slide. So you may have seen that CCAP convened a statewide group of folks. We had FCMAT and charter school lawyers and authorizer lawyers and auditors and authorizers and charter school groups and see all kinds of folks at the table to come up with some recommendations on how to protect charter schools and the public from fraud. There's 20 recommendations. They're kind of in three buckets, we call it. And again, we're grateful there were some people on this call who were very involved in that process, and we're grateful for that. Some of them are most of them, in fact, are applying existing requirements and best practices more consistently. It's not like we don't know how fiscal internal controls are supposed to work, that sort of thing, but whether or not they're being attended to is worth checking out. Maybe there's some model practices that we can do. We recommend, for example, recommendation number 1 in that bucket is that everybody adopt a fraud prevention fraud prevention risk management plan. And we have, just to skip ahead a little bit, we're convening now some implementation working groups to help come up with models of these things so people don't have to invent them on their own. And we're in case you're interested in that, we're looking for more volunteers for that. But we will be developing some model things so people don't have to all invent the wheel themselves. The second bucket is what we heard from a lot of people is, something didn't smell right. I didn't have the fiscal chops to do an investigation. I wasn't even sure I had this. Where do I go for help? Who has the expertise and the authority that I can go to for help? And that was identified clearly as some ways that, and even for an individual school employee, if there's not we recommend, that there be kind of a hotline where you can provide some feedback about something doesn't smell right here. I'm not sure there's any there, but boy, can somebody look at it? So to make sure that the system has ways so everyone in the system knows where to go to get some help. And then the third bucket is pretty relevant as the legislature convenes now, and that is there were some things that we said, look, these things, a lot of this is self-help, and we think we ought to be able to take care of our own house. But there are some things that are clearly beyond the control of local education officials, and we need some help there. And again, as an example, the number 1 recommendation there was the proposal that somewhere in the system there be an inspector general function that combines 3 things, and that is knowledge of the education finance system, because that was one thing that the district attorneys say is really not something that they can navigate very well. Second, subpoena power. Just flat out, not we're asking, you shall provide this information. And the third is actually the prosecutorial authority under one roof. And we were agnostic about where in the system it lives. It could be like a FCMAT-like entity. Maybe one county does it. It could be CDE. It could be FCMAT. Who knows? We didn't want to get bogged down into where it lives, but we just said that's a function that we'd like to see happen. If we could go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit more about what the latest is. Okay, so we already kind of touched on those already. Next slide. I mentioned before that LAO and FCMAT had come up with a report at the legislature's behest, making some recommendations on non-classroom-based funding. It's important to note for this audience that there's a lot of information in there, some reflections on authorizing. So it's not strictly speaking, hey, this is how the non-classroom-based funding process should work. It's based on some of the things we're observing and hearing from the field. There are some real vulnerabilities in authorizing, and for it, just as an example, they've said maybe there should be a rule that if your own ADA in a school district is at a certain size, that should be relevant to how big a portfolio you are allowed to authorize, regardless of what the funding, the administrative fee would be from the schools you authorize. So that's under discussion. There's a lot of authorizer recommendations there that are worth following. There is a bill that is now the SPOT bill. SPOT bill is just kind of a placeholder. This is going to be the vehicle called AB 84. And right now it just has very little in it, but it says this is going to be the vehicle. And our intent is to incorporate a lot of the recommendations from this report and another one that I'll mention. And they're also looking closely at the CCAP recommendations. They showed us this big spreadsheet that they have of all the recommendations from all three reports. Next slide. So here, without going into the details, you can read the slide later, but in the interest of time, these are some of the things that the LEO FCMAT report looked at as to the authorizer role in particular as being a vulnerability in the system. Next slide. This is the other report that came out, the sort of the third of the three, and this was this came out of the court case from the A3 case. And the state controller's office convened a large task force, kind of like the CCAP one, where they looked more particularly at audits and audit requirements. So there are some recommendations in there on what requirements should be for how audits are done of charters, who does them, those sorts of things. Again, for all LEAs, not just for charters, they're taking a look at a bunch of things. So we'll be wanting to pay attention to this. Not all of these are will require statutory changes. There may be some other sort of administrative changes that are made without requiring statutory requirements, but this is another thing that will be incorporated into that AB 84. So stay tuned on that. Next slide. And
All
with
right.
this, I turn it over, I guess, to Michelle.
Thank you. So we're going to talk now about how do we help you as an authorizer. So next slide, please. One of the very first things that you need to do is to develop healthy, ongoing relationships with your charter school. So as we've always said, everything is all about relationships. I can tell you that as an authorizer of 21 charter schools, we have different relationships with each of our different charter schools. And I can tell you that some go really easily and some are a little more difficult. But bottom line is if we all focus on knowing that we're here for the kids, regardless of whether or not you have a contentious or an easy relationship, if everyone's always focused on the kids, then we understand why we're here. So it also provides information with regards to why we might need certain documents, why we need to come and visit schools. Transparency builds trust and understanding by making sure that we're not playing gotcha, that we are here to help you. Sometimes people just don't know what they don't know. And if you share, if you communicate and over communicate, it makes things a whole lot easier. So you need to explore opportunities to invite charter staff to come to your district or county trainings, because if we're all talking the same language, it makes it a whole lot easier. I know that Santa Clara, we hold authorizer meetings, we hold charter leader meetings. We also don't like surprises. So we've talked to all of our charters and said, hey, if you know that you've got a problem going on, give us a quick call. It's so much easier to not have our board be blindsided by hearing about an incident in the newspaper rather than getting a phone call. So we want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And we try and build that relationship so that when we do get the calls from the angry parents, or we have some incident that happens, we can easily pick up the phone and call rather than having to send a notice of concern or a notice of violation. We don't want to go that route. We want to build that trust initially. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it over to Barbara.
All right. So there's a philosophy, I guess, that, you know, if you go down a checklist, you mark it off, it has to be okay. And I think that's a little bit of an old school way of thinking. Michelle and I, Tom, Dave, all of us have touched on today the fact that compliance really goes beyond just the checklist, that we really need to establish a presence at the charter schools. Charter schools are part of the overall public education system. They follow all of the same rules. Sometimes they realize this, sometimes they don't. Their focus on mission and performance, especially those student outcomes, is critical to their success and ability to renew. And so therefore, we should really kind of hone in on those things as well. And those are items that generally can't be addressed just with a checklist. And when I say checklist, it's checklist, but also just an online repository, right? Doing a desk audit of documents generally isn't enough. We need to dig in just a little bit more and develop that more personal relationship with the school, have conversations, that kind of thing. Talk about what's going well, where they're focusing. We can look at the data and ask specific questions about the data. We can use site visits, the document review visits, the ed program visits, a fiscal governance visit to spot check what they've spot check and verify or validate the things that they've submitted through actual conversation. And when I say that, I mean a lot of times you'll see that a charter school will have a policy, but then when you start talking to them or their staff, English language learners is a great example. They might have an English language learner policy or a master plan for ELs, yet the staff have no idea what to do with English language learners or how to support them. And so when you dig in and you start to have those conversations, you can get a much better idea of what's going on at the school than you would with a desk audit alone. Next slide. We want to memorialize and document our work. And so having a system for how we're going to maintain records of our processes, our actions, the outcomes for the year is very important. We really want to build some continuity in our practice leading up to renewal. Staff turnover can wipe out institutional experience, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So going back to the beginning of the presentation, when we start looking at things like where do I get started, you might even go back and revisit that process when you have significant changes to your team. A key member has left. What are the legal updates? What are our procedures? Just go back and review them and figure out where things need to be updated. And so this is good for ongoing capacity building, but also, making sure that you have that institutional experience there. There was a time when I walked into my position in a county office, and the charter schools, once every 35 years, charter schools will have a WASC accreditation and a charter renewal at the same time, apparently. I've never done the math, but that's what I was told. We had a brand new charter leader and a charter leader that was on her way out the door. And this was a unique charter where two very different programs were under one charter dating way back to the 90s. They had no data. They had no information about their previous 5 years. How that happened, I don't know, but the institutional memory for those schools was problematic. But then also when I walked into my position, the person whose position I filled had also gone to migrant education. So that was one aspect of that was working with the schools. The other was my coming into my position to do oversight. All of that information was in binders and that person's head who left the building, right? Like 35 years or more of charter oversight work was gone out the door. And I had nothing but binders that meant nothing to me. Previous trainings and handout packets and all that kind of good stuff. So really work to build the capacity in your organization. Make sure that your board policy stays updated. Super, super important. There's sample policy with California School Boards Association. You can find it on other authorizers' websites. Just make sure that you keep that up to date. You want it to be up to date before you actually need it. And then it's really a good idea to add a website page for charters to access your information and your processes. You may or may not get really detailed there, but just acknowledging that you have charter schools under your oversight and who they are, where they're located, how to contact them, that kind of thing. Next slide. I'm not sure where I'm supposed to end on this, so if I take somebody's stuff, please stop me.
Oh, I think I think I picked it up on this one.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is my audio okay?
Yes.
Okay. So it's very common among authorizers in California that
Not okay anymore.
authorizing duties or maybe no full-time person as authorized. Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
okay,
better.
thank you. I always like to say, you know, when I was an authorizer, I had a staff of 26 people, and then I became a consultant, and everybody I worked with had one or fewer. And one of the biggest things in that scenario is just to make sure that the district has a plan for how the authorizing is going to work and who's going to be responsible. And in particular, what I tried to encourage my clients to do is don't make it so that one person is tag you're it, and then everybody else that helps out is just doing it as a favor to that person. What you need, that the responsibilities for oversight need to be understood, and actually, particularly if you're a district is a very kind of, if I want to, for lack of a better term, call it kind of very civil servicey in the sense you have very detailed job descriptions for every position and those sorts of things. You want the job descriptions for those whose help you will need to conduct oversight as a whole entity, to include that in the job description so that everybody understands that this is a team effort and we really need to make sure that we're covering all the bases so it's not just dumped on the one person. And that also can help insulate against the phenomenon that Barbara just talked about, where all the historical memory resides in one head who retires and then everybody is left trying to pick up the pieces. Next slide. The other thing that can help make your lives easier in this business is if you have a memorandum of understanding between the authorizer and the school that kind of maps out the mutual expectations, how things are going to work, provide some clarity and transparency. This can supplement what's in the petition, where the petition has been silent on some things that aren't legally required, but that would just make it easier for everybody to be on the same page about. I think that we've discussed MOUs in Cassie before. I'll add it in the chat in a sec. I realize I didn't include it in the resources, but CCAP has if an MOU is not familiar to you or not how you've done things, CCAP has a resource that's just, all it does is it provides some samples of, there's like one county and one district that's a big, robust, detailed MOU, and one county and one district that's a pretty spare MOU. And it's got an index that lets you cross-reference the similar. Okay, this is where they deal with special education, so that you can look if there's something there. An MOU obviously is something that you don't want to do on your own. This is getting legal counsel's help. But if you want to just if it is new to you and you want to see some examples of some things that other people do, we have some redacted examples, and I'll put the link in the chat. On to the next slide.
Okay, so we are moving on to survival tips, which we've kind of been covering all along. So next slide, please. The first tip we have for you is you are not alone. I am here with you, and though you're far away, I'm here to stay, but you are not alone. Please understand that even though there are a little over 1,200 charter schools in the state of California, there are really only 328 authorizers right now. And so it's a very small world, but of those 328, we're really grateful that we have so many of you here today. So how better to be able to move forward is to know that you are not alone and that everything starts with relationships. So one of the first and best things that you can do, next slide, is to if you are a district, collaborate with your county office of education. County offices are not only authorizers, but they also have responsibility for district authorized charter schools in the county, including fiscal review of schools, teacher credentialing oversight, differentiated assistance. Many county offices provide support and training and networking for district authorizers. So one of the things that you should know is who you can call. So I know that there are lots of county authorizers right now who are available to provide support. And when in doubt, you can pick up the phone and call your neighboring county if you're not feeling like you're getting enough support. You can coordinate with county and district monitoring functions, collaboration efforts. a lot of times the charter schools don't feel like they can go to the county, even though they are a school within the county. And so we need to make sure that everyone feels that they can be supported. Next slide, please. And I'll hand it off to Tom.
So we're picking up on the MOU point. Legal counsel are a very important resource for you in this business, as most of you probably experience regularly. Obviously, legal costs can be an issue especially for small entities. There are a lot of examples where we have had actually at CCAP lawyers come to us and say, "Can you help provide some support or some help for my client because they're using me as the lawyer for all kinds of things that are non-legal work because nobody, they just bandwidth in-house to do some things, but that costs an awful lot." So there are other groups out there that you can get help from that for things that don't require legal counsel per se. But just be aware that, you going back to Michelle's caveat that she started out every presentation and Cassie says, "Hey, consult your own lawyer." There's a real reason for that. Certainly, if you're looking at something that may result in a high stakes decision, you want to be doing that, holding your lawyer's hand. You do want to have your lawyers help you with questions that may arise from the implementation of recent changes to law where things are unclear. It's not uncommon where new charter legal provisions are so contentious for the legislature that there are some things that they just kind of don't answer and they leave it to the field to figure out. And some of those things, if they're touchy, they have high stakes. The way that gets fleshed out is through the courts, unfortunately. So you do want to be in touch with your lawyer about any of those sorts of things. And again, for MOUs, doing that with a lawyer is important. Next slide.
So digitizing authorizer functions, there are a lot of ways today that we can organize our oversight work to support the renewal process and to archive documents in a way that's organized and makes sense and really creates more of a one-stop shop of our annual oversight. A lot of different tools out there with different functionality. Some are designed specifically for authorizing and some aren't. For example, Epicenter is a pretty big one that goes back several years. They are a repository that is built out with features that are specific to oversight. For example, they have a board center, a charter management center, and a school center. So you can actually in Board Center, for example, add board member terms and biographies and information. This cuts down on some of the requests that we would have asked for in the past in terms of submitting like a board roster and even getting a board roster that doesn't have all of the information that you want or need. So tools like that are really important. And then also within Epicenter, you can document conversations. So rather than having conversation lost in an email thread and not knowing where it is when you need it, you can document important communications there. I'm not familiar with Anvilar as much or School Harbor. ReportWell is a newer company. You've probably seen them at different conferences. They're a group of really funny people and they're fun to be around and they do a great job. One of the important things I know about ReportWell is they're integrating some AI. And they say that their AI can disaggregate data and help you produce a report. I can't swear to it. I know some people on this call are actually contracting with ReportWell or working with them. So it'll be interesting to see how their tool works in future trainings, meetings, that kind of thing. Document tracking services and Monday.com are a couple examples of tools that are not made specifically for charter authorizing oversight, but many of you probably recognize document tracking system from the templates system that we use for things like our LCAP or SARC, school safety plans. If you need a template for a state mandated report or a grant, then they have it. But they also have a repository function. And so you can track either Title I documents through there or charter oversight documents through there. Monday.com is a workflow management tool and has a lot of functionality. If your district has adopted that tool, It's a good one to maybe look at. Michelle's link that she dropped in the chat earlier of their organized workflow. I noticed a lot of their document submissions where they say submit it here. It's attached to monday.com. If you're not using it organizationally, the one caveat is that the functionality is there and it can work well, but sometimes things don't work as well if your other team members aren't also licensed under your same account. Been there, it makes it complicated, even though it's a beautiful tool. What else do we have here? Front-end adoption work pays off in ongoing ease. So if you take the time to build the system to support the work, then in the long run, you will be less stressed trying to figure out where the submission is, whether they responded to your request for a correction or an update, where you're at in the process in general, right? Because these automated systems automatically send out communications to the schools, letting them know something's due, letting them know that something needs to be corrected, and then reporting back to you when it has, so that your workflow is ongoing and not being halted. It can be very helpful to charter schools as well to know exactly what's expected, to have those detailed instructions, to have one place to log in and put information. And platforms like Epicenter, you can even set up so that you have two-way communication in some places. So that can be helpful. Some offer tools, some like Epicenter offer tools that will help schools governing boards to facilitate their governing board roles, or even to have a place to a platform to share their board documents. So those are some additional pieces that might be helpful for you to think about and look at. Next slide. I believe this is Michelle.
Michelle, I'm not hearing you.
Sound again, Michelle.
Me now. Can you hear me now? Oh, good. I don't know what's going on today. So, don't reinvent the wheel. There are lots of supports out there for authorizers. One of the best places to go is to visit the CASI webpage. We also have, as we've seen, our resource folder, which has lots of different resources. I go all the time to other authorizers' websites. I love visiting Laco and Oakland and Alameda and Orange. I can name so many different people and so many different organizations' websites. Don't reinvent the wheel. Phone a friend. Do reference checks. You are not alone. I've already said that so many times today. We are here to help. Next slide, please.
I think we've actually shared, well, the first two we've already shared with you in an earlier slide. FCMAT, as I mentioned, has quite a lot of good resources if you want to check them out. Michelle mentioned the CASI resource page. I hope you'll indulge me. It's okay that I will, in the spirit of networking, just mention CCAP's annual conference, which we're going to have in June. And I mention it in particular because what makes that conference great is a lot of you are there presenting and sharing what you're doing. And just a gentle reminder that mid-February is when the proposals are due for this year's conference. And we would love to see some great proposals from those of you who want to share your expertise. Another thing that we mentioned earlier is this year's conference will end. The last afternoon will be some deeper dives, more hands-on, come away having done something that's based on attendee feedback that they'd like to have less sit and get and more roll up your sleeves and do stuff. So we're providing the window for that. So we hope to see you there. Next slide.
Next slide. Okay, I believe this one's mine. And we want to talk about the idea that you can't know it all. So this is going to be real quick, but I'm going to mention one or two things that I haven't mentioned before. One is the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. Their essential practice. One of the things, for example, they highlight is the use of external evaluators on a team. And also, especially for a small authorizer shop, experienced reviewers are often available on a one-off engagement, and that can be a cost-effective way to do this work. And there are also, when you have a specialty school, such as all of a sudden you've got either a charter petition coming up or a renewal, and say they may be a Montessori-based school or a Waldorf. It's good to know that there are some experts can help with those unique aspects of those schools, which is one of the exciting things about charters is they can have very different approaches to education, but you as an authorizer still need to have the capacity to evaluate that effectively as part of the renewal process. Next slide. The bottom line here is that we have unprecedented opportunities now. The work of CASI for the last year or two has been tremendous to doing this with the new funding from the new federal grant. We're actually looking forward to moving forward with continued support for CASI things. So my little pitch and my little point here says you're not alone, just as Michelle said. And then next slide.
All right. So we only have 12 minutes left. Okay, so there's a question. Are charters required to post the charter petitions on their website and their MOUs? So technically, no, they're not required to post their charter or their MOU on their website, but it does make sense for them to do both of those things as part of transparency. I will say SCCOE does post the charter petitions for all of our charters. We do not post our MOUs. So that's just us.
Maybe if I could just chime in on a little thing there, Michelle. Again, it's not a legal requirement, but in terms of best practice, boy, oh boy, it should not be hard when you look at a charter school's website to find out who the authorizer is on it. Like in there about our school, it ought to say we are authorized by the, and similarly, you know, what's good for the goose and our websites should say what the schools we are universal, but boy, that's a pretty basic thing.
So I do know, so the next question that Sarah just raised is if they don't post them, is there a place on the CDE website where they're posted? So the CDE website does have a list of all of the charter schools and their dates, their charter term dates, and some basic information. But no, they do not have a copy of their charter posted on that as part of that link. But that's a good piece of information that we may want to ask the CDE to have as a living link. And I will say that sometimes because we get these questions from the field, and we can share that information with CDE, things have actually changed on the CDE website. One of the things that wasn't on the list of all of the charter schools was the charter terms, and that has now been added to that CDE database. So we'll include that and let CDE know that that's a good thing to have, Sarah. Thank you. So next slide. So this is really your opportunity to share. I don't think we have time for breakout rooms, but if you've got questions or anything you'd like to raise, you're more than welcome to. I will put in our quick plug at this moment for our feedback. So let's jump to the next slide. And the next slide. So we do, as we said, we really want your feedback on things that you've learned, things that you want to hear and discuss for the future. We look forward to the information that you share with us. And in fact, that's how this training came about, was that we had heard that people wanted more information about oversight practices. And so that's why we brought this one back. So please give us your feedback. We do take it very seriously. And if there are things that you need or want, please let us know. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give you some more information about CASI. Our next upcoming charter chat will be on the 30th of January, the last Wednesday of January. We do provide legal and legislative updates, State Board of Education updates, finance programs, hot topics from the field. We do have breakout rooms, there's also a breakout room for non-authorizer partners. So we separate out so we can make sure that we all have a place where we can talk. There are also the recordings of the charter chats archived on the CASI website. Next slide. We do have our quarterly trainings, and in fact, you're at one of our quarterly trainings right now. Our next quarterly training will take place on April 11th, and that will be Road to Renewal again, because everyone's coming up for renewal, coming around for the beginning of the next year. So that'll be April 11th, and so save the date. You'll get more information on the CASI website as well.
And Michelle, quick correction on the next charter chat is next Wednesday, which is the 29th.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Justin. I was going off the top of my head. So yes, next Wednesday, 29th, 10 o'clock. Be there. So here's the information for being able to contact CCAP. So if you have questions, you're more than welcome to contact anyone from CCAP. And if you get to the next slide, you'll have the Santa Clara County Office of Education contact information. And thank you. Thank you for being here. And if you have questions, we will hang out for the next 7 minutes. Marcia, thank you. Okay. When a charter is deemed high performance, wow, we've got lots of questions. All right. So we'll start with the very first one. When a charter is deemed high performance, does a board need reason to renew them for 5 years instead of the full 7? Since the law says you can be from 5 to 7 years, it is the board's discretion. I will say that best practices from several different organizations, some have actually set criteria for why they would give a 7 versus a 5. I believe, and I believe LACO has specifics. I believe LAUSD, I believe Oakland does. So, but there's nothing written in law that says why you would have to do 5 versus 7. And it's 5, 6, or 7. So it's all of the above. Next question. There have been a handful of charters that have already received denials in a few districts, and I was just curious if CCAP was monitoring this or if anyone could share a deeper dive on the reasons for these denials. Some of these were schools not in the low performing category. All right, so Zach, I can tell you that there are a variety of reasons, and I don't have any information as to the specifics of the charters that you have listed, but I can tell you that most of them will probably dealing with fiscal reasons or for not complying with law. I mean, there's a whole litany of reasons why a denial would happen. And we can go into that conversation offline instead of trying to answer it here.
Yeah, I'd just add to that, Michelle. My understanding is that another area of focus has been, is the school serving all students? Is it doing what it needs to make sure that it's serving all students? And that has been the focus of some discussions, my understanding is.
Yeah, I think a few have been governance as well.
Okay.
All right, so the next question from Miguel. What is the process to renew a low-performing online charter? So Miguel, I'm going to point you directly to Ed Code, which is 47607. 2, which basically says that if you are a low performing charter, you have to follow, you were supposed to be denied unless it can be showed that you have taken meaningful steps to determine the reason for low performance and you are making growth. So you have to go through this process of creating a written plan that the charter board goes through the process of approving to determine how you came up with being in the low performing category and what steps are you going to take in basically creating an improvement plan. And as the authorizer, if that improvement plan does not basically say that it's going to work or what it's going to do or how it's going to pull them together, then you're supposed to deny. So I'm going to point you to the presentation on the road to renewal, which was last January. We did a presentation all about road to renewal, and you can get further details on that one. But it does not matter whether or not they're an online charter, a DOS charter, DOS is, I threw in the wrong word. Online charter, non-classroom based charter, dependent charter. DOS is completely different, but all of them still have to follow Ed Code.
And Michelle, I want to add for Miguel that a low performing school also needs to use
Verified data. Yep.
To show that their students have made 1 year of growth for each year in school. So whatever their verified data is should show the students are making at least 1 year of growth, even though their CASP data doesn't show that.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have a perspective? Oh, go for it, Dave.
I was going to say, the next one talks about perspective on authorizers' approach to evaluating board governance of large charter networks. And I would suggest that this is an area that we still have a lot to learn and have to figure out, because the issue here is if it's a LEA, an independent, if it's a charter that has its own board, then there's the responsibility of that board, the charter board, to in fact have good governance processes. Once you get a CMO involved, then there are some aspects of, is this a school of the CMO and therefore just another location, or is it in fact an independent? Is it a freestanding LEA with its own board? I'll open it to my colleagues, but I do believe we need to do more homework here about how to do it well, because the fundamental piece here is that we need to know who is fundamentally responsible, who can be held responsible for the performance of the school that's under review for renewal or for whatever other purpose. So I'm not being real helpful per se. I'm in most ways laying out what the challenges are. Any of my colleagues want to add to that?
I would just add an acknowledgement of you're asking the question, because there is a lot of disparity in the ways that charter authorizers oversee charter schools, and it doesn't go unnoticed by the charter school leaders that they're having to, to work with a half a dozen, maybe different authorizers, and everybody's asking for something slightly different. So that's a really good observation on your part.
Yeah, I'll say, LACO having several of these larger CMOs and sharing them with other authorizers, each of the LEAs is treated separately, right? So regardless of them having the same board, each LEA is treated independently as it's coming up for renewal. In terms of what that criteria is for each of those LEAs, every authorizer is going to sort of have their own take on it and potentially a different view of that. We do try to reach out with some of our larger districts. So us and LA Unified will have meetings sometimes to discuss some of the larger CMOs and what we're each seeing or if we have concerns or questions about those larger CMOs. So we will try to have that open communication as we're doing our sort of oversight and monitoring.
I think that
But
last
yeah.
point is really important, Indra. Going back to Michelle and Dave's exhortation to remember you're not alone and talk to each other is it really is worth comparing notes if you have several authorizers dealing with a very an entity that may be larger than any of the districts that are doing authorizing. It's worth sort of
I would add too
checking
that
in
for
if you
we
a
have
question.
one also in our county, and what we look for is to see that the board, the governing board for our charter school here, is operating from what appears to be, you know, a very autonomous approach, so that they are reviewing everything and they're actually, you know, taking an active role in this. It's not just a board that's sitting there, you know, rubber stamping everything. To that end too, and this is a whole nother piece that I don't want to get too advanced on, but the whole sole statutory member piece for our authorizing you know, entity, we wanted, this was one part of ensuring that the board for the charter school had autonomy by separating that sole statutory member, and we don't allow that. And that's in the bylaws, and you can always reach out to me or any of the other people here that have been doing this for a while. But we separated that and didn't allow that in their bylaws, so that it was just another way to ensure that they were acting as an autonomous board.
Michelle, I'm not sure who's closing, but I think we're at time.
We are definitely at time, and thank you all so very much. And please make sure you give us some feedback. We do listen. And have a great day. We are actually 2 minutes over time. Bye, guys.